Ever wondered why some of Hollywood's brightest legends surrendered the very passport that launched their stardom? Tonight, we unpack the stories behind 20 Golden Age icons who walked away from the stars and stripes. Love, scandal, taxes, and conscience collide in each jaw-dropping departure. Stay tuned and subscribe for Revelations, John Huston. He was Hollywood royalty, born into the business and crowned with 2 Oscars before he was 40, yet John Huston's restless soul itched under studio spotlights. In the early 1950s, he sailed for Ireland, scandalizing gossip columns by calling Washington's anti-communist witch hunts a script no honest writer could stomach. The Green Hills gave him calm, but the State Department's tax collectors kept tugging at his sleeve. In 1964, Huston walked into the American Embassy in Dublin, surrendered his passport, and signed the oath that made him an Irishman. The break was more than political theater. It freed him to shoot where he pleased, fund risky passion projects, and surround himself with the bohemian crowd he craved. Movies like The Man Who Would Be King and the Dead bloomed from that artistic freedom, while back in Hollywood, the legend of the rebel director who quit America only burnished his myth. Though the U.S. box office lost a marquee name, Huston's creative exile proved a masterclass in betting on your own voice and never looking back. Ule Briner. Broadway thundered when Ule Briner strode on stage, bald head gleaming beneath the spotlights of The King and I. But behind the regal poise, the Russian-born star was losing a chess match with the IRS. Filming too long on U.S. soil erased the lucrative foreign resident tax status that had safeguarded his Swiss fortune. Facing bankruptcy, Briner made a razor-sharp decision in 1965. He flew to Bern, renounced his American citizenship, and retreated to a villa overlooking Lake Geneva. Hollywood insiders gasped, yet Briner's box office power hardly dimmed. He toured the world in command performances, signed European deals the taxman couldn't touch, and turned his defiant exit into a glamorous myth, proof that a true monarch answers to no crown but his own. Josephine Baker. America applauded her voice but recoiled at her skin. So in 1925, Josephine Baker crossed the Atlantic, spun into a Parisian whirlwind of feathers, jazz, and radical freedom, and never looked back. Racism at home still stung, though, and in 1937, she made her feelings permanent. Baker raised her right hand, renounced the passport that had branded her second class, and pledged allegiance to France. Overnight, the girl from St. Louis became a French resistance courier by day and stage goddess by night, slipping secrets under Nazis' noses. Her American career cooled, yet her legend caught fire. Baker returned only as a civil rights heroine, brandishing dual medals from General de Gaulle. By trading the stars and stripes for the tricolor, she carved a legacy larger than any national border, one stamped with courage, glamour, and uncompromising dignity. Maria Callas. The press called her La Divina, but Maria Callas felt like a bird in a gilded cage, trapped in a loveless marriage and hamstrung by U.S. divorce laws. In 1966, the soprano arrived at the Paris embassy in a mink coat, papers trembling in her gloved hand, and told the consul she wished to be Greek again. Relinquishing her American citizenship dissolved her marriage overnight, freeing Callus to chase both artistic daring and her tempestuous affair with Aristotle Onassis. Critics murmured that she'd torched her Broadway bridges, yet the move electrified European houses. Her final performances, raw with personal risk, still echo through opera lore. Callus taught the world that even the purest voice needs sovereignty, and sometimes freedom costs a passport. Barbara Hutton, heiress, fashion icon, and tabloid magnate, the poor little rich girl had everything except the privacy wealth can't buy. When Barbara Hutton wed Danish Count Kurt von Haugwitz-Reventlow in 1935, she saw a chance to trade Park Avenue scrutiny for European discretion. 2 years later, she renounced U.S. citizenship, adopting her husband's title and Denmark's colors. America howled that she'd dodged taxes. Hutton insisted she'd found a country that valued noblesse without the oblige. The fairy tale escape turned bittersweet. Her marriage crumbled, scandals continued, and by the 1950s, she was a citizen of the Dominican Republic instead. Yet the bold act of surrendering her passport cemented her mystique. A woman so wealthy she could buy exile, yet so haunted she never found a true homeland. Her story warns that renouncing one flag can't erase the storms carried in one's heart. Elizabeth Taylor. From violet-eyed prodigy to global icon, Elizabeth Taylor spent decades under America's hottest spotlight, and yet, in 1966, she walked into the U.S. Embassy in Paris and signed away the passport her studio had once guarded like a crown jewel. The move was partly romantic. Marriage to Welsh actor Richard Burton made Britain feel like home, but it was also a rebellious swipe at tax laws and moralists who scolded her turbulent love life. Hollywood columnists predicted ruin. Instead, Taylor's fee for Cleopatra had already shattered salary ceilings, and renouncing citizenship only fed the aura of a star too big for borders. European tabloids followed her yacht like gulls. Burton financed Shakespeare Passions, and the couple's on-screen chemistry in films such as Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf grew even fiercer. A decade later, campaigning for U.S. Senator John Warner, Taylor quietly reclaimed her American papers, but the 9-year exile proved something larger. When you are the storm, you choose your own sky. Una O'Neill Chaplin, debutante of the year at 18, Charlie Chaplin's wife at 18 and a half, and, by 29, a stateless exile sailing for Switzerland after U.S. immigration, branded her legendary husband a communist. In 1954, with Chaplin barred from re-entry, Una strode into a London office, surrendered the nationality that had shamed her spouse, and accepted a British passport. The gesture was thunderous. Daughter of America's Nobel playwright Eugene O'Neill, rejecting the McCarthy witch hunts in favor of artistic sanctuary. Press agents warned her screen prospects were dead, yet the manor on Lake Geneva became Hollywood's most whispered address. Directors trekked there for blessing, and Una evolved into keeper of the Chaplin empire. By trading stars and stripes for Union Jacks, she recast herself from ingenue to matriarch of silent film royalty. Proof that sometimes the biggest role is the one you write for love. Weeb Dubo. At 93, the scholar who had spent a lifetime dissecting America's soul made one final stunning edit. In 1961, invited by Kwame Nkrumah to build Ghana's Encyclopedia Africana, Du Bois renounced U.S. citizenship and swore allegiance to the newborn African nation. The decision echoed far beyond academia. Washington had seized his passport during the Red Scare 1950s. Now he rendered that punishment powerless, declaring, "In my own country I have been nothing but a problem. Here I can be possibility." American presses muttered traitor, but across the black diaspora his farewell read like a liberation manifesto. In Accra, he found late-life purpose, advising leaders and hosting writers who trekked to his veranda for wisdom. When the March on Washington paused for a moment of silence on the eve of his 1963 death, it was clear. By giving up a passport, Du Bois gained the moral citizenship of the world, Tina Turner. She had already survived a violent marriage, reinvented rock and roll at 44, and sold 200 million records. The only thing left to shake was her birthplace. In 2013, nestled in the Swiss canton of Zurich, Turner took the citizenship test in German, then signed papers relinquishing her U.S. nationality. Love for husband Erwin Bach and craving for privacy drove the choice, but so did the IRS. America taxes worldwide income, and Turner was done paying for a country she no longer called home. Critics cried unpatriotic, yet the world tour that followed smashed European box office records, and ads still blared simply the best from Super Bowl speakers. Swiss neighbors, famously reserved, treated her like any other villager buying bread at Migros, exactly the normal life she'd begged for. By swapping Memphis brashness for Alpine stillness, Turner wrote a last triumphant verse: "Freedom is the highest note of all." Bobby Fischer. In 1972, he checkmated the Soviet Union and became America's Cold War hero. By 2004, he sat in a Tokyo jail, spitting fury at the country whose anthem once played for him. Facing U.S. charges for violating sanctions with a rematch in Yugoslavia, Fischer scribbled a handwritten letter renouncing his citizenship, calling the United States an illegal rogue regime. Iceland, grateful for the match that had put Reykjavik on the map, granted him emergency citizenship, and Fischer stepped off the plane a free man, pockets stuffed with chess patents and conspiracy pamphlets. Sponsors evaporated, but legend grew. The champion, who rejected his flag for the board's 64 squares. His exile ended in solitude and snow, yet every Grandmaster interview still circles back to one move, sacrificing a passport to stay in play: Grace Kelly. The world watched in fair-tale awe as Grace Kelly sailed from the MGM lot to Monaco's pink stone palace, yet few grasped the paperwork beneath the tiara. During marriage negotiations in 1956, Prince Rainier insisted his future bride abandon all dual ties. The glamorous Oscar winner signed away her U.S. passport before exchanging vows, effectively trading Hollywood's backlot for The Rock's marble corridors. The renunciation severed lucrative studio contracts overnight. Rainier even banned her films in Monaco, but it also freed Grace from the relentless publicity grind that had shadowed every frame she shot. As princess, she rewrote her stardom into global diplomacy, presiding over the Red Cross, founding arts galas, and turning Monaco into a Riviera tax haven that lured the jet set. Though the silver screen lost its brightest ingenue, Kelly's exit proved cinema royalty could become actual royalty at the cost of a flag: Henry James. Long before expatriation became a tax dodge, Henry James wielded it as a protest pen. By 1915, the American novelist had spent nearly 4 decades in London salons, dissecting old world manners while fretting over new world brashness. When President Wilson stalled on entering World War I, James marched to Whitehall and swore allegiance to King George V, renouncing the United States in outrage over what he called its half-allegiance to civilization. Critics at home cried betrayal, but the act jolted his late career. British publishers rushed limited editions, lecture halls filled with curiosity seekers, and his stature as the expatriate observer crystallized into legend. James's farewell underlined a truth his novels had whispered all along: identity, like citizenship, can be revised for the story one chooses to tell. T.S. Elliot. In 1927, 2 slim volumes of verse and a restless spirit led St. Louis-born Thomas Stearns Elliot into a hushed London registry office. There he took a solemn oath to the crown, slipped his U.S. passport into an envelope addressed "Cancelled," and emerged a British subject devoted to Anglican ritual. The renunciation shocked the transatlantic literary set, yet it liberated Elliot from the squatter's guilt he felt living abroad. Rooted now in English soil, he penned Ash Wednesday and 4 quartets, works steeped in choir stalls and fog-bound rivers that likely could not have bloomed under an American sun. The Nobel Prize followed, sealing his transformation, a Midwestern expatriate who surrendered nationality to anchor his art, proving sometimes a poet must cross oceans and borders to find the right cadence: Terry Gilliam. Monty Python's only Yank always relished satire, but by 2006, Terry Gilliam decided the biggest joke was on him, paying U.S. taxes for wars he opposed from a farmhouse in rural England. Fed up, he queued at the U.S. Embassy, paid the steep $2,350 fee, and renounced the citizenship he'd held since birth. Industry watchers predicted Hollywood financing would dry up. Instead, the move became legend on the festival circuit. Free from America's worldwide tax net, Gilliam secured European co-producers for passion projects like the Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus, while fans hailed him as a director who turned dystopian fears of Brazil into real-life protest. His career reminds creatives that, occasionally, tearing up a passport is the boldest storyboard note. Jet Li. By 2009, the martial arts superstar had conquered both Hong Kong wire-fu epics and Hollywood blockbusters, yet fatherhood pushed Jet Li toward a different battleground: education. He chose Singapore's rigorous bilingual schools for his daughters, but the city-state bans dual nationality. So Li, naturalized U.S. citizen since Lethal Weapon 4, stood in a Singaporean office, signed away Old Glory, and accepted the tiny republic's red and white flag. Critics grumbled he'd lose American roles. Instead, Li parlayed the move into Asia-centric philanthropy, expanding his One Foundation and headlining Chinese megaproductions without IRS paperwork shadows. The decision reframed him from action hero to global patriarch, proof that sometimes the bravest stunt is putting family over franchise. Jules Dasan. Once hailed as a rising giant of post-war noir, Director Jules Dasan watched his American dream collapse when the House Un-American Activities Committee blacklisted him in 1950. Studio doors slammed, friends vanished, and his passport became a weight around his neck. Washington could yank it at any time. Fleeing to Paris with a single reel of Night in the City in his suitcase, Dasan rebuilt his life frame by frame, shooting on borrowed streets and raising 2 sons in borrowed flats. In 1958, he met Greek star Melina Mercouri. Love, and the promise of funding, lured him to Athens, where the government embraced his fierce independence. By 1983, he renounced his U.S. citizenship and became a Greek national, the ultimate rebuke to the country that had named him un-American. Far from ending his career, the act unlocked masterworks like Never on Sunday and Topkapi, which pulsed with Mediterranean sunlight no backlot could mimic. Dasan's exile proves that when one nation calls your art subversive, another may call it treasure. Isabella Roselini. Born in Rome, yet delivered in a New York hospital room, Ingrid Bergman's daughter carried 2 passports and twice the scrutiny. By her mid-20s, modeling contracts required constant transatlantic flights, but the IRS wanted a cut of every lira she earned abroad. In 1982, standing in a Milan consulate, Rossellini surrendered her U.S. papers and chose the citizenship of her parents. The Italian press framed it as a tax maneuver. Isabella called it a homecoming of the heart. Hollywood feared she'd vanish from American screens, but David Lynch cast her in Blue Velvet. Alexander Wang made her his runway muse, and Lancôme crowned her brand ambassador, proof that charisma travels on its own visa. Free of dual-filing headaches, Rossellini funneled her savings into indie films and her beloved farm in Long Island, slipping back into the U.S. as a work-authorized resident only when the role felt right. The decision turned a bureaucratic headache into a bold declaration of identity. Gary Davis. In 1948, Broadway song and dance man Gary Davis stood before a packed Paris press corps, tore up his U.S. passport, and proclaimed himself World Citizen Number 1. Haunted by bombing sorties he'd flown in World War II, Davis vowed never again to pledge loyalty to any single flag. The act made headlines from Time to Pravda. Diplomats scoffed, yet existentialists cheered him on the cafe floor sidewalks. Career prospects in the States evaporated overnight, but Davis transformed notoriety into a globe-trotting lecture circuit, lobbying the nascent United Nations for open borders and universal rights. Though critics dismissed him as a utopian drifter, his passport-free life inspired generations of activists, from anti-nuke marchers to climate strikers. Davis never earned another Broadway credit, but he traded stage lights for a spotlight on humanity's shared stage, reminding audiences that the biggest role anyone can play is citizen of the world. Raymond Chandler. Before he sketched Los Angeles in bruised neon, Raymond Chandler was a Chicago kid shipped to London at 7, drilled in Latin verse and cricket. Struggling to fit either side of the Atlantic, he chose a surprising fix. In 1907, he swore allegiance to King Edward VII and renounced the Stars and Stripes. The clerk's ink was barely dry when Chandler enlisted to fight for Britain in the trenches of World War I, an experience that later bled into Philip Marlowe's hard-bitten melancholy. Returning to the U.S. as a foreign national during the 1930s oil boom, he observed Hollywood's sins with an outsider's X-ray eye, turning them into timeless lines like, "It was a blonde to make a bishop kick a hole in a stained glass window." Far from hindering him, the renunciation sharpened his vantage. Neither fully American nor fully British, he became the detached chronicler of both worlds' hypocrisies, proving that sometimes a writer must burn his bridge to see the river's true shape. Denise Rich. Songwriter of platinum ballads and hostess of glittering charity galas, Denise Rich luxuriated in Manhattan penthouses until her ex-husband's 2001 controversial pardon and a decade of relentless tabloids made privacy the one thing money couldn't buy. In 2011, she quietly filed Form 8854, paid the $450 exit fee, and surrendered her U.S. citizenship for the quiet neutrality of Austria. Shockwaves rippled through entertainment columns. Would she lose her influence on Capitol Hill? Would radio stations boycott her songs? Instead, Rich doubled down on global philanthropy, funding children's hospitals from Vienna to Tel Aviv, while continuing to collect BMI awards for hits recorded long before. The IRS could no longer tax her worldwide earnings, and the political firestorm cooled without the American flag attached to her name. Rich's exit underscores a modern twist on the age-old star lesson. Sometimes the cleanest way to rewrite the narrative is to turn the final page on your passport. These 20 daring exits prove a flag can't contain a fiery soul. Their choices reshaped careers, love lives, and the laws chasing them across oceans. Which story shocked you most? Hit like, share with fellow film buffs, and join us next time for more truly jaw-dropping, forgotten Hollywood screen secrets.